All right, it's time to look into what's trending in employment law. Lawyer, you're on the clock.
All right. Thank you there, Nick, for that quick introduction. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about the EEOC today because the EEOC just last week crossed into its new fiscal year. And so interestingly, right as they were about to end the last fiscal year, they filed a slew of new lawsuits before the fiscal year wrapped up last week. Even though it brought fewer cases than it did the prior year, it shows that the agency is focusing on potentially high impact systemic suits and targeting key priorities that they believe that merit additional enforcement. And it's interesting because with the possibility of the change in the White House, which means that there will be changes at the EEOC if Trump wins. I think things will continue largely as is if Harris wins. The EEOC, I think, recognizing that there could be a change of power, filed these lawsuits, and that means that well into a Trump presidency, if there is one, that the EEOC will have plenty of litigation to keep itself busy with. And so I think strategically, it's consistent with years past or administrations past where they throw a lot of these lawsuits out there, and it will mean that they have plenty of litigation moving forward. Now, interestingly, at the EEOC, because of the way the staggered terms work, right now there are only 4 EEOC commissioners serving on the commission in Washington, D.C. There are 3 Democrat members and 1 Republican member. And I doubt, and Jim, I'd be interested in your thoughts on this, I sort of doubt that before the presidential election coming up in a few weeks here, that second Republican member will get confirmed by Congress. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I agree with you, Bert. There's not even a nominee out there. They're just going to let it run, with 3-1 Democrats and see if they can preserve that as long as they can.
Yeah, so that's exactly right. And what that really means is that if Harris gets in or Trump gets in, I think shortly after an election, you will see a second Republican commissioner appointed. But what really is going to happen here, and this is no different than when Biden took over from Trump, is that if Trump takes over for Biden, the EEOC is still going to have 3 Democrat commissioners for about a year to a year and a half into a Trump presidency. And so I think things will be interesting because what happened during the Biden administration is that even though the Republicans held a majority of the seats on the commission, the Biden administration took the then existing chair of the commission, and even though she was from the majority party, they demoted her from chair and appointed somebody from the prior minority party to be chair of the commission, even though that chair had fewer seats on the commission. So very strategic how things will shake out here. I do think that again, if Trump wins or Harris wins, you will see that second Republican commissioner appointed, but it is going to be a 3-2 Democrat majority for at least a year to a year and a half into the next presidency. So,
hey, Bert,
turning back now, yeah, go ahead, Jim.
Just one thing for folks to be on the lookout, just because of what you said about those staggered terms, that they are going to have a majority no matter who wins for some time. Employers and our attendees tuning in this morning need to be on the lookout for a regulation that I expect that they will try to finalize that will require employers to submit to the EEOC what they're paying their employees. Right. This is they are desperate to get your pay data, your salary data, your hours worked data. And the EEOC has forecasted on the regulatory agenda that they're going to propose a rule that would require employers to do that. We don't know the details of that, but suffice it to say it will be expensive, invasive, and set employers up for discrimination claims and potentially union organizing. So be on the lookout for that.
Our viewers definitely appreciate that insight, Jim. So, turning back to these lawsuits that the EEOC filed. So, in fiscal year 2024, the EEOC filed its first lawsuits alleging violations of the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act. We'll talk about that in just a minute. So, the latest EEOC strategic enforcement plan, which was passed a little over a year ago, that runs through 2028, and that included commitments by the Commission to protect vulnerable workers who may not know their legal rights or are uneasy about exercising them, and consistent with prior administrations to combat systemic workplace discrimination and harassment. So one of the sectors, and we've talked a lot about this on the program because I think this seems to be sort of certainly under the Biden administration and prior to that, Obama administration, then you saw things go the opposite way during the Trump administration. The retail and service industry sectors and the health sector, so hospitality, research, retail, restaurant, healthcare, those industries have literally been under assault by the federal government. And so is a lot of an interesting aspect of the EEOC's new cases that it filed in fiscal 2024 were in those areas of restaurant, retail, hospitality, and the healthcare sectors. And so I think when you have industries where there's a lot of turnover, a lot of interesting things go on with wages, with tip minimum wage. You might have teenagers sometimes working in those industries, and you might see workplace harassment claims coming out of that. So I think that if you're in those types of industries, if you're an HR practitioner in one of those companies or the general counsel in one of those companies, you really need to keep your eye on your harassment, discrimination type policies in those industries. Also, I mentioned that the EEOC really is focused on this Pregnant Workers Fairness Act. They filed 5 lawsuits in fiscal 2024. The first of those lawsuits was against a trucking equipment manufacturer that put a worker on unpaid leave instead of trying to accommodate her pregnancy. The last of those Pregnant Worker Fairness Act suits was against a Florida resort that allegedly fired a line cook rather than consider her request for 6 weeks of leave to physically recuperate and grieve following a stillbirth. So very interesting cases going on. And because of the timing of the filing of these suits and the makeup of the EEOC with those staggered terms, I think even if President Trump were to regain the White House and appoint a new chair to the EEOC, this litigation will continue. You have a commission that will support these efforts. So one interesting aspect of all of this is it's not going to end even if the White House changes. Sticking with the EEOC, before we get to Jim real quickly, maybe taking a look at a lighter side of things. I don't know why I like to pick on the dispensary industry, but a Colorado marijuana dispensary has agreed to settle with the EEOC a lawsuit claiming it fired a worker for failing to clock in and out of her shifts, even though she informed supervisors that she had memory issues due to her disabilities. So this one had an employer kind of in a catch-22. So the EEOC and Nature's Herbs and Wellness Center, which does business as High Plains Strains, asked the federal judge in Colorado to approve a consent decree. In that consent decree, the dispensary will pay $95,000 to settle the case, and on top of the payout, the owners have to send an apology to the former employee, and the apology language has been put in the consent decree. It says, "On behalf of Nature's Herbs, Inc., I wish to express my sincere regret how you were treated during your employment with Nature's Herbs. We will review our policies to ensure they explain the process for employees to request an accommodation." So this employee had been working for this company as a bud tender at one of its shops in Colorado in October 2019. During her interview and throughout her employment, she told her supervisors that her disabilities impacted her memory and she might have trouble remembering things such as how to clock in and out. And now, like I said before, it kind of put the employer in a catch-22 because, of course, if you have an employee who's not clocking in and out properly, well, then the DOL is going to come down, sniffing down your throats and trying to figure out if you're not paying the employee correctly. And so this employer gave her some performance reviews, encouraged her to improve her memorizing of pricing of the products, and also to clock in and clock out properly. She eventually got a verbal warning for that. And she told the manager that she felt the warning amounted to disability discrimination because of her memory issues. She eventually got terminated for failing to clock in and clock out properly. And she filed a charge of discrimination with the EEOC. And again, this is settling. So I think it just shows that employers, again, there are more employers, I think, that get nailed for failing to engage in the interactive process with employees than they do for actually terminating employees who may or may not have a disability. And here, I don't think the employer really engaged in that interactive process to try to figure out if it could reasonably accommodate her. And rather than continuing the litigation, the company decided that it was better off settling the suit. So High Plains Strains is going to be out of this litigation. And I think, again, the case serves as a reminder that employers really do need to balance interests, pay aspects, Department of Labor compliance, EEOC compliance, and don't forget to engage in that interactive process with the employees.
Hey, Bert, is it true that the employer wrote the apology note on rolling papers?
Jim, I'm not quite sure of that, but I can dig into that a little bit further. They may have.
Ooh, I got one too. Thank you once again for tuning in to This Week at Work. If you enjoy the show, please share it with your colleagues. Forward our invites. Share the link, aimea.org/thisweekatwork, or follow or subscribe wherever you get your news and entertainment, like LinkedIn, YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts. We're everywhere you are. And you can be part of the show. Send your questions and comments anytime to info@thisweek.work. We'll see you next week, 7:30 a.m. Central Time, when we discuss what's happening this week at work.